Good morning, everyone. Today we will talk about state jurisdiction, which is a topic in international law. I'm Swati Singh Parmar, Assistant Professor, Dharmashastra National University, Jabalpur. Let us start our discussion. So, let us begin with the introduction. And in introduction, I first want to talk about what is state jurisdiction. So, state jurisdiction normally refers to the power or the authority of any state to affect persons, properties, or circumstances within its territory. So, if any person is doing an act or not doing an act, a thing that is happening in a property or otherwise, or any circumstances within the territorial limits of a state, and the state's power or authority to regulate those persons, properties, and circumstances is known as state jurisdiction. Now, when we talk about state jurisdiction in international law realm, then state jurisdiction means largely criminal law jurisdiction, while if we talk about civil law jurisdiction, it still is considered as a national domain. Now, how this state jurisdiction is exercised? State jurisdiction is exercised primarily through three modes. One is legislative, executive, and the third is judicial. So, legislative, executive, or judicial modes are there through which a state can exert its jurisdiction. Moving forward, there are certain principles that decide the state jurisdiction and decide its course. So, how a state jurisdiction is to be exerted and whether a state jurisdiction arises or not, all of this is decided by certain principles. The five principles that I want to discuss with all of you today, amongst which the first one is the territorial principle. The territorial principle, as the name suggests, it is the principle that applies states' authority and power within the territory of a state. And it also refers to exclusivity of state jurisdiction. That means that a state within its territory has exclusive jurisdiction over individuals, properties, circumstances. And this exclusive authority to deal with criminal law situations, criminal issues, is one of the most commonly known, widely accepted, and primary form of state jurisdiction. Now, this territorial principle gives to the state an exclusive right to make laws and apply those laws within its territory. And a few examples of application of territorial jurisdiction through this territorial principle would be one, car accident. So, if a car accident occurs within a territory of a state, inside the car, whether there are citizens or non-citizens, the authority of state to decide over such a car accident or any other harm arising out of that car accident will be that of the state within which the car accident has taken place. Again, if we take the examples of murder, theft, robbery, dacoity, wherever these incidents, these criminal acts take place, the state within whose territory these incidents take place, the state will have the absolute territorial jurisdiction to try the people involved in murder, robbery, dacoity, and likewise. Again, taking another set of example different from such criminal incidents. If we talk about environmental law, then a state has the power to regulate the things relating to pollution. So the state has the power to regulate a factory, an industry, or any other setup which is the source of pollution, even if that source is outside the territory. So if the pollution effects are within the territory of the state, even if the source of that pollution is outside the state, this state has the power to regulate it. So, for example, there is state A and state B. State B has a factory set up near the international borders, the boundary shared between state B and state A. The factory is set up in state B near the border between state A and B. Now, the factory, it it has the hazardous gases that pollute the environment on the borders and the villages situated on the border between A and B. So if state A's environment is being harmed by the hazardous gases that are polluted in the environment of state A by the factory situated in state B, then state A, due to this territorial principle, because the pollution is within the territory of state A. So due to the territorial principle, state A can legislate upon the pollution that has the source in state B. So regardless of where the source of pollution is, or regardless of where the pollution originates, state B, where if it has the effects of pollution felt within its territory, then state A can very well legislate upon it due to the territorial principle. So these are a few examples of how territorial principle gives rise to territorial jurisdiction. Second principle is the nationality principle, and as the name suggests, this principle applies to the nationals of a state. So it applies in the situations where there is a conduct, either an action or an inaction by the country's nationals. So if the citizens of a state are involved in a conduct, uh, by citizens being involved in that conduct, the state has the jurisdiction over those citizens or over that conduct. This nationality principle allows a state to have criminal jurisdiction over any of its citizens who are accused of any criminal offences in a different state. So nationality principle, the basic application of it, the obvious application of it would be that uh, this principle gives state a jurisdiction over its nationals or citizens, but that's the obvious understanding of it. Under international law, this nationality principle also means that a state can try its nationals for criminal offences in beyond the state, in different territories also. Now, historically, this nationality principle was seen to be closely linked with civil law systems. So there are two major law systems in the world, civil law systems and the common law systems. Common law systems are usually UK and all the Commonwealth countries. The colonies of the former colonies of UK usually adopted the UK's common law legal system. So those are the states which are common law legal system, and then there are civil law legal systems. India is a common law legal system. So this nationality principle was originally seen to be linked with the civil law legal systems, but then during the 20th century, this was commonly adopted in common law legal systems also. So it has become common to both now civil law legal systems as well as common law legal systems. Now, nationality principle also applies in two category of things that a state has. One is ships, the ships belonging to a state, and aircraft belonging to the state. Because we are not only talking about territory, but we are talking about things that go beyond territory. So ship can go beyond the territory of a state, and aircraft can go beyond the territory of state. So ships may remain in the territorial waters, which will be the territorial jurisdiction of the state. Similarly, aircraft may remain in the territorial airspace of the state, but then they also go beyond it. So the ships are the aircrafts that bear the national flag of a state are seen as extension of sovereignty of that state. So if a flag is there on the ship is considered to be that part of ship, the ship, the platform, that is considered to be Indian state. So in that sense, the territorial jurisdiction is on that ship also. Similarly, aircraft is seen, a flag bearing aircraft is seen as the territory of that state of whose the flag it bears. So that way, ships and aircrafts are seen to be the national of the state, especially if the ship and aircraft is registered in a state or bears the national flag. It is considered to be national of that state, and therefore ships and aircrafts are also treated as subjects of jurisdiction and subjects of nationality jurisdiction, the jurisdiction arising out of this nationality principle. So, for example, if there is a happening, an incident that occurs on a ship or occurs in an aircraft, or an incident arising out of a shipwreck or a blast in an aircraft, and any harm caused by it, that is dealt by the state where the ship or the aircraft was registered, or the state's flag where whose flag the ship or the aircraft was carrying. So nationality principle does not only apply to the nationals of a state, but also applies to the aircraft or the ships of that state. Now let us look at the third principle of state jurisdiction. This principle is known as passive personality principle. This principle also involves individuals, but in nationality principle, which is also known as the active personality principle, in that the perpetrators of a crime had to be the nationals of a state, which is why the state could have jurisdiction over those nationals. In this passive personality principle, the not the perpetrators, but the victims are to be the state's citizens or state's national. So, passive personality principle arises in situations where a country's citizens are the victims. So, for example, something happens outside the limits of India where the Indian citizens are harmed in a foreign location, in a different jurisdiction. In that situation, Indian jurisdiction can be invoked. So this principle, the passive personality principle, allows the states only in limited situations. This is not a universal principle in the sense that it will apply in all situations. Only in a handful situations, there can be specific situations where the states can have jurisdiction to try a foreign national who's involved in harming the state's citizens. So, state A, for example, can claim jurisdiction over the nationals of state B in case the nationals of state B have harmed or victimized the nationals of state A. So these are the situations where the offences are committed abroad. The nationals of state A are harmed abroad, but then because they're nationals of state A, because of the passive personality that state exerts on its nationals outside its territory also, therefore the state can have its jurisdiction invoked. Now, as I said that this does not apply in all situations, but applies in handful situations, and I'll try to exemplify the situations in which it applies by naming a few conventions in which base the state jurisdiction on passive personality principle. The few situations arise in these conventions. So, for example, the case is dealt by International Convention Against Taking of Hostages, 1979. So, if hostages are to be taken and hostages are of India, then Indian state will have jurisdiction, even if the hostages are taken in Italy, UK, France, Australia, Pakistan, any other state. Similarly, Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Crimes against Internationally Protected Persons, 1973. Third is Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, 1984. So this convention is also known as CAT in abbreviated form. So wherever the provisions of CAT will apply. So for example, if an Indian is imprisoned in Australia and in his imprisonment, during his imprisonment, he is exposed to torturous behavior of the Australian police personals or any other cruel behavior, then India can invoke its jurisdiction and say that our jurisdiction is there in to try these situations because our nationals are being treated cruelly or being tortured. So these are the situations where a state can exert its jurisdiction where the state nationals are the victims outside the state. Now let us move to the fourth principle of state jurisdiction, which is known as the protective principle. Protective principle arises in the situations where the conduct is directed against a country's crucial or vital interest, and therefore the state invokes its jurisdiction to protect its safety, security, integrity, and sovereignty. States may exercise their jurisdiction invoking the protective principle over its nationals or non-nationals. So it can be applied over its citizens as well as aliens. Now, few examples of protective principle jurisdiction. Few examples where a state may invoke its jurisdiction using the protective principle include espionage. So where an individual, whether it's citizen or not, is involved in spying activities against the state's government or state's department involving crucial and vital interest of the state. So in cases of espionage, the state may invoke its jurisdiction. Second example is counterfeiting of government money or seal. If government's money, or if the notes or coins are counterfeited, or if the seal of a government document is counterfeited and fraudulently created by some private entity, by a citizen or a non-citizen of a state, then state may invoke jurisdiction saying that this is crucial to our state interest and therefore we have jurisdiction. Similarly, third example is falsification of official document. If any official document of a state is falsified, it is fraudulently created to be misrepresented, or it is forged by an individual. In that state, the cruciality of the official document may allow a state to have its jurisdiction over such a conduct. Fourth example is perjury before consular officials. So in either of these situations, and these are not exhaustive, there are other examples also, where a state can argue that we have jurisdiction because our vital and crucial interests are being hindered and they are at stake. Therefore, due to this protective principle, we have jurisdiction over these issues. Now, fifth principle is the universality principle, which says that in cases of crimes that shake the conscience of international community, in that case, that shaking of conscience of international community becomes a universal concern, and it no more is a national, domestic, or territorial concern. And therefore, a thing that has happened beyond one's territorial limit, a thing which has happened without one state's nationals being involved, still it is such grave that it is a universal concern. That is why a state may argue that this is a universal concern, which is why we invoke our jurisdiction. This principle, although widely known, is a rarely used principle. It is rarely invoked for invoking states' jurisdiction. And recently, Argentina used the universality principle of state jurisdiction, uh, which was one of the earliest instances where this principle was invoked in modern international law history. And it used this principle against the Rohingya refugee issue, against the Rohingya, not refugees, against the Rohingya issue in the state of Myanmar. So Argentina dealt with the human rights violations of Rohingya community in Myanmar and dealt with the case against Myanmar within its uh, uh, state jurisdiction, saying that we are invoking our state jurisdiction by way of universality principle because it is a universal concern. That is why Argentinian domestic courts decided a case involving Rohingyas against the Myanmar. So this is one recent example where universality principle was invoked. Other than that, universality principle, as I said, though widely known, is rarely invoked, and it is used only in situations where all the four previously discussed principles, the territorial principle, the nationality principle, the passive personality principle, and the protective principle, only when these four principles are absent or they cannot be applied, only in such situations universality principle is invoked. Also, because I said that the rationale of this principle being invoked is something so grave that it has now become a universal concern and it's no more is a domestic or a regional concern. Because of this high threshold of universality principle, it is rarely invoked because rarely would such situations arise which shake the conscience of humanity worldwide. So mostly states are divided on their opinions about instances, events, even on human rights atrocities occurring in one state. The states will be divided whether to act, support, or be against that state. So in all of this international politics and the different ways in which states operate in their interactions with each other, therefore to have this common point where the threshold is has become now a universal concern is a rarity. So therefore this principle is rarely invoked. Also, because the principles like territorial principle, the nationality principle, which is active personality principle, the passive personality principle, and the protective principle, all these four are so expansive that so territorial principle extending beyond territory, nationality principle extending beyond the nationals, beyond the territory. So all of these are so expansive that they themselves try to tend to include almost all possible situations where persons, properties, or events are involved. And only when these principles are exhausted to deal with a situation, then the argument of universality principle arises. So this is another reason why universality principle is rarely seen applicable. So we have very rare examples of universality principle, which is why I said that Argentinian situation where Argentinian domestic court used universality principle to invoke Argentinian state jurisdiction over Rohingyas who were affected in another foreign jurisdiction, which is Myanmar. So that is why I said that this Argentinian situation is a unique lone example in modern international law history where universality principle was invoked. Now, another situation where universality principle is invoked is situations relating to piracy in high seas, the issue of pirates in high seas, where they may belong to different states, they may operate in different territories, in different territorial waters of different states, but still piracy has become such a serious concern that many scholars see it as a universal concern, which is why in cases of piracy, states invoke their jurisdiction citing universality principle. Another example is war crimes. When war crimes happens, most of the states see war crimes as such a grave thing that it invokes the conscience of community globally, and therefore it is treated as a universal concern and therefore a potent ground to invoke state jurisdiction using universality principle. So universality principle in that sense is very fluid and all-encompassing principle to invoke state jurisdiction, which is why many scholars also see universality with skepticism, because they say that it can be invoked in any situation citing universal concerns. So that is why some scholars also see it with their skepticism. Now, if we uh, if we tend to assimilate whatever we have read so far and classify that in state jurisdictions, we can classify them in two broad categories. So the broad categories of state jurisdiction, they are made out of the combination of uh, either of these five principles of state jurisdiction that we just read: the territorial principle, nationality principle, passive personality principle, protective principle, and the universality principle. So all of these, used in different degrees, give rise to two broad classification of jurisdiction. But before that, first let us see the domestic laws and how states have jurisdiction in domestic laws, because our understanding from there and our exposure from domestic laws will help us in understanding international law state jurisdiction better. So in case of domestic laws, I'm sure most of us are aware that jurisdiction is of three kinds. One is jurisdiction of prescription, jurisdiction to prescribe. Jurisdiction to prescribe is the ability or the power or authority of state to prescribe certain behavior. So citizens should do this, citizens should do that, citizens should not do this, citizens should not do that. So this ability, the power or authority of a state to prescribe certain behavior to its citizens, is the jurisdiction of prescription. Second is jurisdiction to enforce. So once certain laws prescribe certain standards of behavior, then those laws are also to be enforced. So the power of the state to enforce those laws of prescription are due to the jurisdiction to enforce. Now, third is the jurisdiction to adjudicate. So in cases where laws of prescription are not enforced, or they are enforced but they are violated by the citizens, where laws of prescriptions are not abided by, in that situations conflict may arise, and such conflicts may be adjudicated by the states due to their state jurisdiction to adjudicate. So usually there are these three jurisdictions, which we also hinted in our uh, beginning of the presentation, where I said that states have jurisdiction by way of legislating, executing, and um, judicial ways. So jurisdiction to prescription is the legislative ways where prescription of certain conduct is given by way of law. Jurisdiction to enforce is execution of those laws. Jurisdiction to adjudicate is judicial recourse of state jurisdiction. So these are the three broad categories of state jurisdiction that we are aware of at domestic level. Now, if we talk about international level, in international level, there are usually two kinds of jurisdiction. One is prescriptive, where international law prescribes certain standard of behavior for the states. And second is enforcement, where international law tries to enforce those prescriptions. The third category, which we find in domestic law, jurisdiction to adjudicate, is not present in international law because of the fact that international law courts can have jurisdiction only when the states submit to their jurisdiction. So, for example, one prominent international law court is International Court of Justice, situated at The Hague, Netherlands. International Court of Justice, or ICJ in its abbreviated form, can have jurisdiction only when the states involved in a conflict submit to its jurisdiction. So that is why I say that state jurisdiction does not arise in that, but jurisdiction in cases of international law can be prescriptive or enforcement and not judiciary, not the judicial enforcement. So these are the broad categories of jurisdiction in international law. But these are not just the two categories. There are other forms of jurisdiction also, and other forms of jurisdiction. We will see the other forms of jurisdiction in our next slide. So these are another, in addition to the jurisdictions we discussed, these are the forms of jurisdiction that emanate from the principles that we discussed. First is territorial jurisdiction, which is foreground in the territorial principle. Second is extraterritorial principle. The genesis of extraterritorial principle in modern international law is to the SS Lotus case, which is a famous case where the a French ship SS Lotus collided with another ship in high seas, and there was a question of which state will try this situation where a collision has taken place between two ships. Both ships belong to different states, and the situation occurred in high seas, where high seas is beyond the territorial waters of both the states. So, who will execute over this? And a principle of extraterritoriality or extraterritorial jurisdiction, where a state can exert its jurisdiction even beyond its territory, was was invoked for the first time. So, extraterritorial jurisdiction is yet another form of jurisdiction. Then we have nationality jurisdiction that arises from nationality principle, and as I said earlier, it is also known as active personality jurisdiction. And then the universal jurisdiction. There are other jurisdictions also, like protective jurisdiction and passive personality jurisdiction, arising from both of these principles that we had read. So, uh, there is yet another jurisdiction in international law, which is prescriptive jurisdiction. And prescriptive jurisdiction, because we have not discussed a principle related to this, that is why we'll discuss prescriptive jurisdiction in little detail. So, prescriptive jurisdiction refers to states' power to creating or enforcing laws that govern the conduct of individuals and entities even outside the territory. So the individuals or entities that belong to a state, that state can prescribe certain behavior for those individuals and entities that applies to those individuals and entities even when they are outside the territory of the state. And a classic example of this would be the Hindu Marriage Act. So Hindu Marriage Act would govern the marriage between two Hindus, even if though those two Hindus have become foreign nationals now. So if two Hindus are now Australian citizens or American citizens or French citizens or Latin citizens, even then they, by the virtue of they being Hindu and by virtue of Indian state having a domestic legislation prescribing the conduct of marriage between two Hindus, because of that, the Hindu Marriage Act provisions will continue to apply to those Hindu individuals who are situated outside the territory of India. So this is a prescriptive jurisdiction. So Indian courts will have jurisdiction, and Indian law, the Hindu Marriage Act, will have jurisdiction. By virtue of Hindu Marriage Act, the Indian courts will have jurisdiction over those Hindus who have married and who may not be Indian citizens now, or who may not be within the territorial limits of India now. So, who are outside India or have become foreign nationals, but they continue to practice Hinduism, which is why the Hindu Marriage Act provisions will apply to them. So, this is known as prescriptive jurisdiction. And prescriptive jurisdiction, because it is actually a culmination and a combination of different principles that we read, because it is territoriality, because those people were situated in the territory of India, which is why you have the laws that were legislated by Indian Parliament, the Hindu Marriage Act, applicable to them. Nationality, because they were nationals of India, that is why the laws were applicable then. Passive personality, because now they've traveled abroad, now they are no more Indian citizens maybe, but due to the passive personality of state, the Hindu Marriage Act continues to apply to them. Then universality principle, uh, and a bit of protective principle. So this principle is a culmination point, a melting pot of variety of different principles of state jurisdiction. Now, coming to an end, today in our today's lecture, we discussed about state jurisdiction and what is the meaning of state jurisdiction. Then we discussed 5 broad principles on which state jurisdiction is built upon, starting from territorial jurisdiction, nationality principle, or the active personality principle. Third, we discussed passive personality principle. Then we moved to the protective principle, and then ultimately we talked about universality principle. We also talked about examples and illustrations in each of these principles. And then we talked about 2 broad classification of state jurisdictions in international law. After which we talked about 4 different categories, in addition to the 2 broad classification: the territorial jurisdiction, the extraterritorial jurisdiction, the universal jurisdiction, and the nationality jurisdiction. And then we discussed a little bit in detail the prescriptive jurisdiction of a state. Uh, I hope our discussion on state jurisdiction has clarified or introduced state jurisdiction and international law relating to that in brief to each one of you. Thank you for today's discussion.